My ex-mother-in-law sent her church friends to harass my daughters, so I exposed her lies to the entire congregation. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it has reached. My name is Rachel. I'm 46 years old, and last Saturday morning, 6 elderly women cornered my 15-year-old daughter at a farmer's market and made her cry. They called her unchristian. They called her selfish. They told her she was going to hell for not loving her baby brothers enough. The baby brothers who exist because my dead husband cheated on me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story gets worse before it gets better. Much worse. 1 year ago, my husband Daniel died in a car accident. We'd been married for 18 years. We have 2 daughters, Melissa, who's 17 now, and Sophie, who just turned 15. Daniel was driving home from work when a truck ran a red light and hit him broadside. He died instantly. They told me he didn't suffer. For about 3 days, I was the grieving widow. The community rallied around us. My daughters were devastated. Daniel's parents, Richard and Margaret, they were destroyed. Their only son, gone at 48 years old. It was the kind of tragedy that brings families together, until it wasn't. 4 days after Daniel's funeral, my daughters sat me down at our kitchen table. Melissa was holding Sophie's hand so tight I thought she'd break it. They both had been crying. Sophie couldn't even look at me. "Mom," Melissa said, her voice shaking, "we need to tell you something about Dad." My heart stopped. In that moment, I knew. Somehow, I just knew it was going to change everything. They told me they'd found text messages on Daniel's old phone, the one he kept in his desk drawer. They'd been looking for photos of him, wanting to make a memorial video, when they stumbled across months of messages with a woman named Jessica. Explicit messages, love messages, messages talking about their future together, messages about 2 baby boys, Daniel's sons, born 8 months ago to his affair partner. I sat there at that kitchen table, my husband 4 days in the ground, and felt my entire marriage crumble into dust. 18 years, 2 children, a home we'd built together. All of it built on lies. My daughters were sobbing. They felt guilty for telling me, guilty for finding out, guilty for existing while their father had created a whole other family behind our backs. I held them both and told them none of this was their fault. But inside, I was screaming. The next day, I called my lawyer. Yes, you can divorce a dead man. Well, technically, I'd already started divorce proceedings. I just hadn't told anyone yet. Because 3 weeks before Daniel died, I'd found a credit card statement for an apartment I didn't know about. I'd hired a private investigator. I'd gotten photos, text messages, bank statements showing thousands of dollars going to Jessica every month. I was going to leave him. I'd already packed boxes in the garage, made plans, found an apartment for me and the girls. Then he died, and everyone expected me to be the perfect grieving widow. But I still had all the evidence, every photo, every text, every receipt. Because the divorce was never finalized, I had no legal restrictions on what I could share. I just didn't know I'd need it quite so soon. Daniel's parents, Richard and Margaret, they're both in their late 70s. They'd always been devout Christians, the kind who went to church 3 times a week, who quoted scripture in casual conversation, who believed wives should submit to their husbands. Daniel's parents, Richard and Margaret, they're both in their late 70s. They'd always been devout Christians, the kind who went to church 3 times a week, who quoted scripture in casual conversation, who believed wives should submit to their husbands and children should honor their parents no matter what. When Daniel died, they inherited his personal bank account and his life insurance, a substantial amount. I never fought them on it because, honestly, I didn't want his money. I had my own career. I'd been the breadwinner in our marriage anyway. The girls and I would be fine. But Richard and Margaret wanted more than money. They wanted my daughters. They filed for custody, claiming I was an unfit mother. They wanted to move into our house, saying family should stay together. They called me every day, sometimes multiple times, demanding we spend time with them. And they wanted my daughters to love Jessica's boys, to be big sisters to the children born from their father's betrayal.
My daughters refused, not because they're cruel, but because they're traumatized. They're in therapy twice a week, trying to process the fact that their father had a double life, that he had other children he loved while lying to them every day. Richard and Margaret didn't care. They called my girls selfish, unforgiving, bad Christians. The harassment got so bad I had to block their numbers. I got a lawyer involved in the custody case. I made it clear they were not welcome in our home until they apologized to my daughters and stopped pressuring them about those boys. They didn't apologize. Instead, they went to their church. Last Saturday was Sophie's 15th birthday. Her party wasn't until later in the month, but I wanted to do something special for her actual birthday. There's this amazing weekend market in our town where local farmers sell fresh produce, eggs, meat, homemade goods. Sophie loves it there. She's obsessed with trying every chocolate vendor and collecting honey from different farms. I gave her a $100 budget and told her to go wild, get whatever she wanted. Chocolate, sweets, whatever made her happy. She'd been through so much this year. She deserved a morning of pure joy. Melissa and I were at the vegetable stands when Sophie called. I'd been gone maybe an hour, starting to worry a little because Sophie usually checks in constantly. But when I answered, all I heard was crying. "Mom," she sobbed, "some women have me cornered. They won't let me leave. They keep yelling at me." I ran, Melissa right behind me. We found Sophie backed against a jewelry stand, a bag of chocolates clutched to her chest, surrounded by 6 elderly women. They were all talking at once, voices getting louder and louder. "Your grandparents just want to love you. Why are you being so selfish? Those poor baby boys lost their mother and father, and you won't even visit them. You're supposed to be a Christian young lady. Where is your compassion? Your grandfather is 78 years old and you're breaking his heart." Sophie was crying so hard she was shaking. She's 15 years old, being verbally attacked by grown women old enough to be her great-grandmothers. I shoved through the circle and pulled Sophie behind me, told Melissa to take her sister, pay for her stuff, and get to the car. Then I turned to face these women. I recognized some of them. From the years Daniel and I occasionally attended Richard and Margaret's church for holidays, sweet little old ladies who baked cookies for the church potluck, who volunteered at the food bank, who looked like everyone's kind grandmother. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. The ringleader, a woman named Carol with perfect silver curls, drew herself up. "We're trying to help that child see the error of her ways. Margaret told us how you're all treating her and Richard, refusing to let them see their granddaughters, keeping them from those poor orphaned boys. A good Christian wife would obey her in-laws and teach her daughters to honor their grandparents." I actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made several of them step back. "A good Christian wife?" I repeated. "You want to talk about Christianity? Let's talk about the fact that Daniel was cheating on me for 2 years, that those poor orphaned boys are the product of an affair, that he was living a double life while I supported our family." Carol's face went red. "That's not what Margaret told us. She said Jessica was your surrogate because you couldn't have more children, that you rejected those babies because they were boys." The lie was so outrageous, so completely disgusting, that for a moment I couldn't even speak. "She told you I rejected babies because of their gender?" My voice was shaking now. "She told you I used a surrogate?" Another woman, shorter and rounder, spoke up. "Margaret showed us pictures of you refusing to hold them, said you were bitter and vindictive, that you're keeping your daughters away out of spite." The screaming started then, mine and theirs, voices getting louder, angrier, other market vendors starting to stare, security approaching. We were all asked to leave. I got to my car where my daughters were waiting, these 6 women following me like vultures, still shouting about Christian duty and honoring elders. I drove away, hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. That night, after my daughters went to bed, both of them crying themselves to sleep, I got on Facebook. I messaged Thomas, a guy I'd always gotten along with at Richard and Margaret's church, one of the few reasonable people in that congregation. "Thomas," I wrote, "I need to know what Margaret has been saying about me and my girls." His response came quickly. "Rachel, I'm so sorry. I'll call you. He told me everything about the massive post Margaret had made in the church's private Facebook group, a whole sob story about how my daughters and I had abandoned Richard and Margaret, how we'd left them homeless and penniless, even though they'd inherited Daniel's life insurance and bank account, how my daughters refused to even speak to them, how we were the reason they'd lost custody of Jessica's boys, even though those children were living with Daniel's distant cousins because nobody else would take them. She'd painted herself and Richard as the victims, suffering grandparents being punished by their cruel daughter-in-law and ungrateful granddaughters. And because their church has some extremist members who believe women should submit to men and children should obey without question, Margaret got exactly the support she wanted: prayer chains, offers to help, and apparently volunteers to minister to my wayward family. "But Thomas," I said, "what did she tell them about Jessica?" "About the affair? How did she explain 2 babies from another woman?" Thomas's voice was grim. "She said Jessica was your surrogate, that you couldn't have more children and agreed to use a surrogate, then rejected the babies when they turned out to be boys. She's been telling everyone you wanted daughters so badly you abandoned your own children." I sat there in my dark living room, phone pressed to my ear, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This church has always been problematic. They're not great on LGBTQ issues. They're very traditional in their gender roles. But they have one saving grace, one thing they're absolutely rigid about. They do not tolerate cheating, at all, from husbands or wives. It's considered one of the worst sins you can commit. Break your marriage vows and you're done. The whole congregation will turn on you. Margaret knew this. So she'd lied, created an elaborate story to explain Jessica's children while painting me as the villain. I thanked Thomas and hung up. Then I sat in the dark for a long time thinking. The next day, I didn't go to work. I called in, said I had a family emergency. Then I went to my office and pulled out the box I'd hidden in the back of my closet, the box with all the evidence I'd collected from my divorce, photos of Daniel and Jessica together, in our house, in our bed, making out on our living room couch, her face clearly visible, obviously not me, different skin tone, different hair color, different everything. Text messages between Daniel and Jessica, talking about their love, their future, their babies. Text messages between Daniel and his parents, where Richard and Margaret knew about the affair, supported it, encouraged Daniel to follow his heart, told him I was too focused on my career and he deserved a woman who would put him first. Messages from Richard and Margaret harassing me about the divorce I'd started, calling me vindictive, saying I was destroying their family, and my personal favorite, the piece of evidence that made my blood boil every time I read it. Text messages from Richard and Margaret to my daughters, sent 2 days after Daniel died, calling my girls bastards, telling them it was their fault their father died because they'd told me about the affair and I'd started divorce proceedings. 2 days after their father died, and his parents blamed them for his death. I had everything, every ugly, horrible truth. I drove to a print shop, paid extra for high-quality color printing on nice paper, printed every single photo, every text message conversation, every email, hundreds of pages. Then I went home and spent the next 4 hours making binders. Beautiful binders that looked exactly like the little prayer books their church hands out for singing hymns. Same size, same general look. I even made covers that looked similar to the church's usual designs. But when you opened the binder, the first thing you saw was a full-color photo of Daniel and Jessica making out in our living room. Their faces crystal clear. Her distinctly not me. Under the photo, I wrote in beautiful calligraphy, Daniel and Jessica's love story. I made 20 binders, took them to the church early Sunday morning before service started. There's a desk at the back where they keep extra songbooks for people who forget their own or need one. Nobody ever checks what's on that desk. They just assume it's all church-approved materials. I scattered my binders among the regular songbooks, made sure they were spread throughout. Then I left. I didn't attend the service, but I had friends who did. Friends who texted me updates throughout the morning. The first binder was opened about 15 minutes into worship. Someone reached for what they thought was a songbook, opened it to follow along with the hymn, and instead found my ex-husband's affair documented in full color. The gasp was apparently heard across the sanctuary. Within minutes, multiple people had opened the binders. They were being passed around, whispered about. The singing faltered and stopped. The pastor tried to regain control, but it was too late. By the time service ended, the entire congregation knew the truth. The church's Facebook group exploded. People were angry at Daniel, at Jessica, but most of all, at Richard and Margaret. The names people called Daniel and Jessica in those Facebook comments were so vulgar, the pastor had to step in and remind everyone to keep things relatively clean. This was a church group, after all. But the anger at Richard and Margaret was different. It wasn't just about them knowing about the affair, it was about them lying to the congregation, using the church as a weapon against me and my daughters, harassing us through their church friends, and worst of all, sending those horrible text messages to my daughters right after Daniel died. The church takes dead seriously the commandment about not mistreating widows and orphans. My daughters are technically fatherless now. The fact that Richard and Margaret had called them bastards and blamed them for Daniel's death was unforgivable. I got messages from church members I barely knew. Apologies for what happened at the market. Apologies for believing Margaret's lies. Invitations to return to the church for support, even though I'd only attended maybe 5 times in 18 years. One woman wrote, "What was done to you and your daughters was wrong." While divorce is a sin, your shock and pain are understandable. Perhaps one day you'll return to the light, unlike your cheating husband and his Jezebel. They used another word, actually. One I can't say here, but you can imagine. As for Richard and Margaret, the congregation turned on them completely. They were shunned. People wouldn't sit near them, wouldn't speak to them, refused to serve them at church functions. Within 2 weeks, they stopped attending. Margaret made a Facebook post on her personal page about feeling alienated, about how nobody cares for the elderly anymore, how she wished her great son was still alive because he would have taken care of them. With what money, I wanted to comment, I was the one who paid our bills. Daniel's salary barely covered his car payment and his affair expenses, but I didn't comment. I just watched as their friends from church, the same people who'd supported them for decades, slowly disappeared from their lives. Last week, I got a letter from their lawyer. They're dropping the custody case. They're moving to Florida to live near Richard's sister. They won't be bothering us anymore. My daughters are relieved. Sophie's nightmares have decreased. Melissa is actually smiling again. We're continuing therapy, all 3 of us, working through the trauma of Daniel's betrayal and the harassment from his parents. People ask me if I feel guilty, if I went too far, if exposing everything so publicly was the Christian thing to do. Here's what I think. Richard and Margaret lied about me. They lied about my daughters. They used their church as a weapon to hurt and harass us. They cornered my 15-year-old daughter in public and made her cry on her birthday. They blamed my children for their father's death. They didn't just cross a line, they obliterated it. So no, I don't feel guilty. I didn't lie. I didn't fabricate anything. I simply told the truth. The same truth they'd been desperate to hide. The same truth they'd tried to bury under a mountain of lies and fake piety. Sometimes, the most Christian thing you can do is expose the darkness, not out of revenge, but to protect the innocent. My daughters are innocent. They didn't ask for any of this. They didn't deserve to be harassed, blamed, or manipulated. They deserved the truth. The church deserved the truth. And Richard and Margaret deserved to face the consequences of their actions. I still have the binders, all 20 of them. They were never all taken from the church. Some people didn't want to look. Some people took them home, I guess. but I kept the originals. Just in case Richard and Margaret ever try to come back into our lives with more lies, because I'll tell the truth again, as many times as necessary, to anyone who needs to hear it. My daughters know this. They know I'll fight for them, protect them, stand between them and anyone who tries to hurt them, even if those people are elderly and claim to be acting in God's name. Sometimes mothers have to be warriors, not with swords or shields, but with truth, with evidence, with the willingness to stand up and say, no more, not my children, not today, not ever. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed this, you can support me by giving it a thumbs up so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story. With love and respect.